The dim neon sign of ASRI Technical Solutions flickered intermittently, casting long, distorted shadows across the cluttered entrance. Roy Becker, sweat plastering his dark hair to his forehead, nudged Bruno's hover dolly forward with a sigh. The droid, usually a fountain of sardonic commentary, was currently unresponsive, a casualty of Roy's less-than-graceful exit from the space station. He muttered, "Hope this technical solution is better than the last one I tried." The repair shop was a symphony of organized chaos. Tools hung from magnetic strips, spare parts were stacked in precarious towers, and the air thrummed with the low hum of diagnostic equipment. The scent of ozone and lubricant hung heavy, a comforting aroma for anyone familiar with the inner workings of spacecraft. "Hello." Roy called out, his voice echoing slightly in the large space. "Anyone here who can fix a droid with a penchant for quoting Shakespeare?" A voice, melodic yet tinged with a hint of impatience, responded from the depths of the shop. "One moment. Just calibrating a particularly recalcitrant gravflux capacitor." Roy waited, taking in the scene. He ran a hand over the blaster holstered at his hip, a nervous habit he hadn't been able to shake since the debacle on Station 7. The mission had been a straightforward retrieval job, but it had quickly devolved into a chaotic firefight with the Nova Syndicate. Now, here he was, hoping a repair shop on Aldrin 5 could salvage his malfunctioning droid and, hopefully, his career. A figure emerged from behind a towering stack of disassembled engines, and Roy found himself momentarily speechless. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her skin was a vibrant, almost iridescent, blue, shimmering subtly under the shop's artificial lights. Silver coveralls, practical yet form-fitting, accentuated her lithe frame. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat braid, revealing high cheekbones and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and an underlying hint of amusement. "I'm Thea Asri," she said, wiping grease from her hands with a rag. Her voice was even more captivating in person, a blend of warmth and authority. "And this," she gestured towards Bruno with a raised eyebrow, "I presume, is the Shakespearean tragedy?" "That's him," Roy confirmed, managing to find his voice. "Bruno. Mark 7 Companion Series, heavily modified." Thea circled the deactivated droid, her gaze sweeping over its chassis with professional interest. "Mark 7. Discontinued decades ago. The autonomous learning matrices alone are worth a fortune." She paused, her fingers tracing the lines of a particularly intricate modification. "What exactly happened to him?" "He decided to perform Hamlet instead of opening an airlock," Roy explained, trying to downplay the absurdity of the situation. "I had to use an EMP to shut him down." Thea winced. "An EMP? On a Mark 7? That's like using a plasma torch to light a candle." "It was that, or become space dust," Roy retorted defensively. "Can you fix him, or not?" Thea's expression softened. "Maybe. Probably. Let's see what we're dealing with." She produced a diagnostic scanner and began connecting it to Bruno's access ports. The device hummed to life, projecting a holographic display of intricate circuits and data streams. "Interesting," Thea murmured, her fingers flying across the scanner's interface. "Very interesting. I've never seen modifications quite like these." "Did you do this work yourself?" "Most of it," Roy admitted. "Over the years. You pick up a few tricks." Thea chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that made Roy's pulse quicken. "Tricks? You've completely redesigned his cognitive matrix. Half these upgrades shouldn't even work together, but somehow." She looked up at him, her blue eyes gleaming with admiration. "You're either a genius or completely insane." "I prefer creatively resourceful," Roy grinned. "So, what's the diagnosis?" Thea's expression turned serious. "The good news is, I can fix him. The bad news is..." She pulled up a form on her screen, her brow furrowing. "According to station regulations, Any work on modified military-grade artificial intelligence requires a Class 3 cybernetic intervention permit. Military-grade? Roy exclaimed in disbelief. Bruno's about as military as a food synthesizer. Tell that to the registration database, Thea replied, tapping the screen. His base model was originally designed for tactical support. Even with your modifications, he's still classified as potential weaponry. Roy ran a frustrated hand through his hair. How long does it take to get this permit? Standard processing time is 2 to 3 business cycles, Thea said, watching his reaction with amusement. Then, seeing his exasperation, she quickly added, but, there might be a faster way. Roy's ears perked up. I'm listening. Thea leaned closer, and Roy caught a faint scent of engine oil and something subtly sweet, like vanilla. I could classify this as an emergency repair under Section 47B of the Technical Services Code, she said, her lips curving into a mischievous smile. But that would require some creative documentation. Name your price, Roy said, already sensing where this was going. Dinner, Thea said, her eyes sparkling. Roy blinked, caught off guard. Excuse me? Dinner. With me. Tonight, she repeated, tapping the screen impatiently. Unless you prefer to wait those 2 to 3 business cycles. It's your choice, Spacer. He should have been suspicious. Beautiful, intelligent women with shimmering blue skin didn't usually ask him to dinner, especially not after knowing him for 5 minutes. But there was something in her eyes, a mix of challenge and genuine curiosity, that made his usual caution evaporate. Deal, he said before he could think better of it. But Bruno better not start reciting love sonnets when you're done. No promises, Thea winked. Now, let's see what's really going on inside this fascinating brain of his. She picked up a specialized wrench and began dismantling Bruno's head casing with practiced efficiency. Roy found himself watching her hands, strong and sure yet surprisingly delicate in their movements. She clearly knew exactly what she was doing, which only made her more intriguing. So, she said, without looking up from her work, want to tell me what you and your literary droid were really doing that got you into so much trouble? I doubt you were delivering poetry books to orphans. Thea snorted. With those custom shield modifications I'm detecting? Try again, Spacer. Let's just say some people took exception to our business methods, Roy hedged, carefully avoiding specifics. Pirates? Thea guessed, her eyebrow raised. The Nova Syndicate's been hitting stations in this sector. Wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Roy kept his expression neutral, years of experience helping him mask his true feelings. News travels fast. Everything travels fast on Aldrin 5, Thea agreed, her tone casual. Especially gossip. She extracted a small, damaged component from Bruno's head. Ah, here's your problem. Your friend's personality matrix crossed wires with his cultural database during the last backup cycle. Must have happened when you tried to access the station's security systems. Roy's eyes widened slightly. I never said anything about security systems. Thea's smile was knowing. You didn't have to. These were patterns on his interface ports tell quite a story. She held up the component, examining it closely. Question is, do you want me to just fix the malfunction, or would you like me to take a look at these other, interesting, modifications while I'm in here? Their eyes met, and Roy realized she was offering more than just repair services. She was offering trust, a rare and valuable commodity in his line of work. How about we discuss it over dinner, he suggested, trying to sound smoother than he felt. Thea laughed, a light, musical sound. Smooth, Becker. But you still haven't told me what you were really after on that station. Maybe I just like making dramatic exits with unrecovered data cores. Her casual tone didn't quite hide her interest. Station chatter mentioned something valuable being stolen recently. Something the syndicate wanted kept quiet. Roy stiffened, his hand instinctively moving towards his blaster. You're well informed. I hear things, she shrugged. People talk while their ships are being repaired, especially when they think the blue girl is just another gearhead. And what do you do with the things you hear? Roy asked, his voice low. Depends on who's asking. Thea set down her tools and faced him directly, her blue eyes unwavering. Are you asking, Royce Becker? The way she said his name sent an unexpected thrill down his spine. This was dangerous territory. He barely knew her, and she already knew too much. But something in his gut told him to trust her, and his gut had kept him alive this long. All right, Thea Asri, Roy said, meeting her gaze. Let's talk about data cores. And maybe, just maybe, I'll tell you why a food synthesizer with a penchant for Shakespeare is the most valuable asset I have. All right, Thea Asri, Roy began, meeting her unwavering blue gaze. Let's talk about data cores. And maybe, just maybe, I'll tell you why a food synthesizer with a penchant for Shakespeare is the most valuable asset I have. He paused, letting his words hang in the air, gauging her reaction. Thea didn't flinch, her expression a carefully constructed mask of polite interest. Roy knew he was dancing on the edge of a precipice, but the potential reward was too tempting to ignore. Intriguing offer, Becker, Thea finally said, her voice laced with amusement. But data cores are like credits in a spacer's pocket, useless unless you know how to spend them. What makes this particular core so interesting? Roy hesitated, glancing around the repair shop. Despite the organized chaos, he couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. Not here, he muttered, lowering his voice. Too many ears. Let's grab that dinner, and I'll tell you everything, or at least, enough to pique your interest. Thea considered his proposal for a moment, her eyes scanning his face for any sign of deception. All right, Becker. But on my terms. We eat where I choose, we talk when I say, and if I don't like what I hear, the deal's off. Understood? Perfectly, Roy replied, relieved she hadn't dismissed him outright. Lead the way, Blue. Thea grinned, grabbing her jacket from a nearby hook. Don't call me that in public, she warned, her tone playful but firm. Some of the locals get sensitive about species-specific nicknames. They left the repair shop, the neon sign of ASRI Technical Solutions casting a final, fleeting glow on their faces. The station corridors were bustling with activity, a constant flow of spacers, merchants, and maintenance crews. Thea led Roy through the crowded passageways with an easy confidence, navigating the maze-like structure with a familiarity that suggested she knew Aldrin 5 like the back of her hand. Where are we going? Roy asked, struggling to keep up with her brisk pace. I was expecting something a little less public. Patience, Spacer, Thea said, her eyes scanning the crowd. The best conversations happen in the most unexpected places. They descended several levels, the pristine corridors gradually giving way to grittier, less maintained passageways. The air grew thicker, heavy with the smell of recycled air and cheap synth alcohol. The crowds thinned out, replaced by a shadier clientele, tattooed thugs, furtive-looking merchants, and the occasional droid with questionable modifications. Starting to get the picture? Thea asked, noticing Roy's apprehensive expression. Aldrin 5 isn't all gleaming towers and corporate offices. There's a whole other world hidden beneath the surface. They arrived at a dimly lit doorway, a flickering neon sign above it proclaiming, the Rusty Sprocket. The bar was tucked away in a forgotten corner of the lower levels, its entrance barely visible from the main passageway. Thea pushed open the door, and a wave of noise and heat washed over them. The Rusty Sprocket was everything Roy had expected and more. The air was thick with smoke, the tables were sticky with spilled drinks, and the patrons were a motley collection of spacers, smugglers, and low-level criminals. A lone synth band played a mournful tune in the corner, their music barely audible above the din of conversation. Welcome to my office, Thea said, a hint of irony in her voice. Don't worry, the food's surprisingly good. And the information flows like synthale. She led him to a secluded booth in the back, away from the prying eyes of the other patrons. The booth was dimly lit, the seat cushions worn and stained. Roy slid in, his hand instinctively resting on his blaster. Relax, Becker, Thea said, noticing his unease. No one's going to make a move here unless they want a permanent vacation in the station's waste recycling plant. A hulking bartender, his face scarred and his arms covered in tattoos, lumbered over to their booth. What'll it be, Thea? He growled, his voice surprisingly gentle. Knuckles, my friend, Thea said, flashing the bartender a warm smile. A couple of your finest synth steaks and 2 glasses of asteroid amber. And make sure they're not watered down tonight, eh? Always a pleasure, Thea, Knuckles rumbled, shuffling off to fill their order. Knuckles? Roy asked, raising an eyebrow. I'm guessing that's not his real name. Let's just say he's a man of many talents, Thea said, her eyes twinkling. And one of those talents is knowing everything that happens in this sector. If anyone knows about stolen data cores and the Nova Syndicate, it's Knuckles. Their drinks arrived, 2 tall glasses filled with a glowing amber liquid. Roy took a cautious sip, surprised by the smooth, slightly sweet taste. Not bad, he admitted. But I still don't see how this helps us get my data core back. Patience, Becker, Thea repeated, taking a long sip of her drink. Information is like a puzzle. You need to gather all the pieces before you can see the whole picture. She paused, her expression turning serious. Now, tell me about this data core. What was on it, and why is the Nova Syndicate so interested in getting it back? Roy hesitated, weighing his options. He didn't fully trust Thea yet, but he needed her help. And he knew he couldn't get the data core back on his own. It contains information about the Syndicate's operations in this sector, he said, choosing his words carefully. Their smuggling routes, their contacts, their dirty little secrets. Thea's eyes widened slightly. That's significant. No wonder they're so desperate to get it back. It also contains something else, Roy added, his voice dropping to a whisper. Evidence of a conspiracy that reaches far beyond Aldrin 5. Something that could shake the foundations of the entire sector. Thea stared at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and excitement. You're not serious. Roy nodded grimly. Dead serious. And that's why I need your help. I can't take on the Syndicate alone. I need someone who knows this station, someone who can help me navigate the underworld. Thea leaned back in her booth, considering his words. And what do I get out of this, Becker? Besides a free dinner and a potential death sentence. The satisfaction of taking down the bad guys, Roy said, hoping his sincerity would convince her. And maybe, a chance to make a real difference. Thea chuckled softly. You're a romantic, Becker. I didn't take you for that type. I'm a survivor, Roy countered. And sometimes, survival means doing the right thing. Their synth steaks arrived, sizzling on metal platters. Thea picked up her fork, her eyes still fixed on Roy's face. All right, Becker. I'm in. But don't think this makes us friends. We're just business partners. For now. Fair enough, Roy said, relieved. So, where do we start? We start by talking to Knuckles, Thea said, nodding towards the bartender. He knows everyone who's anyone on Aldrin 5. If anyone knows where the Syndicate is hiding that data core, it's him. Thea flagged down Knuckles, who lumbered over to their booth with a weary sigh. What can I do for you, Thea? He asked, his eyes scanning Roy with suspicion. Something that could change everything, Roy finished, his voice barely a whisper. Thea stared at him, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Change everything how? Roy took a deep breath, steeling himself to reveal the truth. He had kept this secret close to his chest for too long, but he knew he couldn't trust Thea completely without sharing the full extent of the danger they were in. The data core doesn't just contain information about the syndicate's operations, he said, his voice low and intense. It contains proof of their involvement in a conspiracy that reaches to the highest levels of the sector government. A conspiracy that could ignite a full-scale war. Thea gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You're serious?" Roy nodded grimly. "Deadly serious. The syndicate has been secretly funding and arming separatist groups on several planets, destabilizing the region and creating opportunities for their own expansion. They want to plunge the sector into chaos, and they're willing to do anything to achieve their goals." "But, why?" Thea stammered, her mind reeling from the implications of his revelation. "Power," Roy said simply. "Control. The syndicate wants to be the dominant force in the sector, and they're willing to sacrifice millions of lives to achieve their ambition." Thea was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on Roy's face. Then, she took a deep breath and nodded decisively. "All right," she said, her voice firm. "I'm with you. We have to stop them." "I knew I could count on you," Roy said, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. "Don't get me wrong, Becker," Thea said, her expression serious. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for the sector. For my people. The syndicate's actions threaten everything I believe in. Whatever your reasons, I'm grateful for your help," Roy said. "So, what's the plan?" "The plan is simple," Thea said, her eyes gleaming with determination. "We need to get that data core back. And we need to expose the syndicate's conspiracy to the authorities." "Easier said than done," Roy said, his brow furrowing. "The syndicate will be expecting us. They'll have tightened security around the data core. Getting close to it will be suicide." "Maybe," Thea said, a mischievous smile spreading across her face. "But I have an idea. A way to get close to the data core without raising too much suspicion." "I'm listening," Roy said, intrigued. "The syndicate stores its most sensitive data in a heavily guarded vault located in the heart of their headquarters on Aldrin 5, Thea explained. It's protected by multiple layers of security, including biometric scanners, laser grids, and a contingent of heavily armed guards." "Sounds impossible," Roy said, his hopes sinking. "Not impossible," Thea corrected. "Just, difficult. But there's a weakness in their security. A loophole that we can exploit." "And what's that?" Roy asked, his curiosity piqued. "The vault's security system relies on a central control hub," Thea said. "If we can gain access to that hub, we can disable the security measures and slip into the vault unnoticed." "How do we get into the control hub?" Roy asked, skeptical. "That's where my skills come in," Thea said, her eyes sparkling. "I know the station's network architecture like the back of my hand. I can use my access codes to bypass the security protocols and gain entry to the control hub." "Access codes?" Roy asked, raising an eyebrow. "I didn't know you had access to the syndicate systems." Thea chuckled softly. "Let's just say I have friends in high places. People who aren't exactly fans of the syndicate's methods." Roy nodded slowly, realizing that Thea was more connected than he had initially thought. "All right," he said. "I'm trusting you. But if this is a trap..." "It's not a trap, Becker," Thea said, her voice firm. "I'm putting my life on the line just like you are. We're in this together." "Okay," Roy said, convinced. "So, when do we strike?" "Tonight," Thea said, her eyes gleaming with determination. "The longer we wait, the more time the syndicate has to prepare. We need to hit them hard and fast, before they know what's happening." "All right," Roy said, steeling himself for the task ahead. "Let's do it." Thea led Roy back to her repair shop, where Bruno was still undergoing repairs. The droid's head casing was open, revealing a complex network of circuits and wires. "How's he coming along?" Roy asked, glancing at the deactivated droid. "Almost finished," Thea said, her fingers flying across a diagnostic panel. "I've repaired the damage from the EMP, and I've also upgraded his security protocols. He'll be able to provide us with valuable support during the mission." "Support how?" Roy asked, curious. "Bruno has access to the station's security cameras," Thea explained. "He can monitor the vault and alert us to any potential threats." "Not bad," Roy said, impressed. "Looks like my old friend is going to be useful after all." Thea finished her repairs and closed Bruno's head casing. The droid's eyes flickered to life, and he swiveled his head to face them. "Greetings, Master," Bruno said, his voice clear and steady. "I am at your service." "Welcome back, Bruno," Roy said, relieved. "We have a mission for you." "A mission?" Bruno asked, his voice tinged with excitement. "How delightful. Shall we engage in acts of daring heroism and thwart the machinations of villainous scoundrels?" "Something like that," Roy said, chuckling. "We need you to monitor the Syndicate's data vault. Keep an eye out for any unusual activity and alert us to any potential threats." "Understood, Master," Bruno said. "I shall be your eyes and ears in the shadows." Thea handed Roy a small device, a sleek black communicator. "This is a secure channel," she said. "Use it to communicate with Bruno. And be careful." "I always am," Roy said, his voice confident. As darkness fell, Roy and Thea made their way to the Syndicate's headquarters, a towering skyscraper that dominated the Aldrin 5 skyline. The building was heavily guarded, with armed guards patrolling the perimeter and security cameras watching every move. "This is going to be tricky," Roy muttered, glancing at the formidable defenses. "Trust me," Thea said, her voice confident. "I know a way in." She led him to a secluded service entrance, where she used her access codes to bypass the security protocols. The door slid open, and they slipped inside, unnoticed by the guards. They made their way through a maze of corridors, avoiding security cameras and patrols. Thea knew the building like the back of her hand, guiding Roy through the labyrinthine structure with ease. Finally, they reached the control hub, a small, unassuming room located deep within the building. The door was locked, but Thea quickly bypassed the security system and opened it. They stepped inside, and Roy's eyes widened in surprise. The room was filled with advanced computer equipment, monitors displaying complex data streams. Technicians in white coats bustled around, monitoring the security systems. "This is it," Thea whispered. "The heart of the Syndicate's security network." "Looks like we're going to have to fight our way through," Roy said, his hand resting on his blaster. "Not necessarily," Thea said, her eyes gleaming with determination. "I have a plan." She walked over to a central terminal and began typing furiously, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The technicians glanced at her curiously, but they didn't seem alarmed. "What are you doing?" Roy whispered, his voice tense. "I'm uploading a virus into the system," Thea said, her eyes fixed on the screen. "It will disable the security measures and give us access to the vault." "A virus?" Roy asked, skeptical. "Are you sure that's going to work?" "Trust me," Thea said, her voice confident. "This is my specialty." The virus completed its upload, and the monitors flickered, displaying error messages. The technicians began to panic, realizing that something was wrong. "What's happening?" one of them shouted. "The system is crashing," another one yelled. Thea turned to Roy, a triumphant smile on her face. "Now," she said. "Let's go get that data core." They slipped out of the control hub and made their way to the data vault, located on the other side of the building. The security measures were disabled, but the guards were still on alert, their weapons drawn. "We're going to have to fight our way in," Roy said, his hand tightening on his blaster. "Not if I can help it," Thea said, pulling out a small device from her pocket. She pressed a button on the device, and a high-pitched whine filled the air. The guards clutched their heads in pain, their faces contorted in agony. "What did you do?" Roy asked, amazed. "Sonic disruptor," Thea said, grinning. "It scrambles their inner ear, rendering them temporarily incapacitated." They slipped past the guards, who were writhing on the floor in agony, and reached the vault door. The door was made of solid steel, with a complex locking mechanism. "Stand back," Thea said, pulling out a small cutting torch. She ignited the torch and began cutting through the door, sparks flying in all directions. The guards, recovering from the effects of the sonic disruptor, began to stir. "Hurry!" Roy urged, glancing nervously at the guards. Thea finished cutting through the door, and it swung open, revealing the interior of the vault. The vault was filled with rows upon rows of data storage units, each one containing sensitive information. "There it is," Thea said, pointing to a specific unit. "The data core." Roy rushed over to the unit and pulled out the data core, a small, unassuming device. He held it up to the light, examining it closely. "We got it," he said, his voice filled with relief. "We actually got it." Suddenly, a voice boomed from behind them. "I wouldn't be so sure about that." Roy and Thea turned around, and their eyes widened in shock. Standing in the doorway was Security Chief Grom, a hulking figure with a cybernetic eye and a menacing sneer. He was flanked by a squad of heavily armed guards, their weapons trained on Roy and Thea. Well, Grom said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What do we have here?" "Thea Asri, and her little friend. I must say, I'm disappointed. I thought you were smarter than this, Thea." "Grom," Thea said, her voice tense. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to ensure that you don't leave with that data core," Grom said, his eyes fixed on Roy. "Hand it over, and maybe I'll let you live. Refuse, and, well, let's just say things are going to get messy." Roy's hand tightened on the data core, his mind racing. They were trapped, surrounded by heavily armed guards. Their mission had been a success, but now their lives were in danger. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Grom," Roy said, his voice calm and steady. "This data core contains information that the world needs to see. Information that will expose your crimes." Grom laughed, a cold, chilling sound. "You're a fool, Becker. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The Syndicate is more powerful than you can imagine. And we will not allow you to interfere with our plans." He gestured to his guards, who raised their weapons, ready to fire. "Kill them," Grom ordered, his voice filled with venom. "Kill them both." But before the guards could fire, Thea grabbed Roy's hand and yanked him behind a row of data storage units. "Run," she yelled, diving for cover. Laser fire tore through the vault, data storage units exploding in showers of sparks. Roy and Thea weaved through the chaos, dodging laser blasts and ducking behind cover. "This way!" Thea shouted, leading Roy towards a back exit he hadn't noticed before. They sprinted through the vault, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. Grom and his guards were hot on their trail, determined to retrieve the data core and silence them forever. As they reached the back exit, Roy glanced over his shoulder and saw Grom raise his weapon, aiming directly at Thea. Without thinking, Roy threw himself in front of Thea, shielding her from the blast. A searing pain shot through his chest as a laser blast struck him, sending him sprawling to the ground. He gasped for breath, his vision blurring. "Roy!" Thea cried, rushing to his side. "No!" Grom and his guards closed in, their weapons trained on Roy and Thea. Their escape route was cut off. Their mission had failed. And now, their lives were about to end. But just when all hope seemed lost, a familiar voice boomed from the communicator in Roy's pocket. "Allow me to introduce myself," Bruno said, his voice amplified and distorted. "I am Bruno, and I have a message for Security Chief Grom. It is a message of fire and brimstone, of righteous fury and unwavering justice. Suddenly, the lights in the vault flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Alarms blared, and the sounds of chaos erupted from outside the vault. What's happening? Grom roared, his voice filled with panic. I believe Master Bruno has taken control of the station's security systems, a guard stammered, his voice trembling. He's locked down the entire sector. Impossible! Grom exclaimed, his face contorted with rage. Not impossible, a new voice said, a voice that sent a chill down Grom's spine. Just, highly improbable. A figure emerged from the shadows, a figure clad in silver coveralls, her skin shimmering with an ethereal blue glow. It was Thea, but she was different. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and her expression was one of cold, calculating fury. Who are you? Grom demanded, his voice trembling. Thea smiled, a cruel, chilling smile that revealed her true nature. I am Thea Asri, she said, her voice dripping with venom. And I have come to collect what is owed. Before Grom could react, Thea raised her hand, and a bolt of energy shot forth, striking Grom in the chest. The security chief crumpled to the ground, his body convulsing in agony. The guards, terrified by what they had just witnessed, dropped their weapons and fled, their faces pale with fear. Thea turned to Roy, her eyes softening. Are you all right? She asked, her voice filled with concern. I'll live, Roy said, his voice weak. But what was that? What did you do to him? Thea sighed, her expression weary. I'll explain later, she said. Right now, we need to get out of here. She helped Roy to his feet, and they stumbled out of the vault, leaving the chaos and destruction behind them. They had survived, but their ordeal was far from over. They had the data core, but they had also made a powerful enemy. And they had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened to engulf the entire sector in war. As they made their way through the darkened corridors of the Syndicate's headquarters, Roy couldn't shake the feeling that they had just stepped into a world of danger and intrigue, a world where nothing was as it seemed. And he knew that their journey had just begun. Roy stood, swaying slightly, Thea's concern etched on her shimmering blue face. The laser blast had burned a nasty hole in his side, and though she'd managed to cauterize the wound with a field medic kit salvaged from a nearby storage locker, the pain was a constant, throbbing reminder of how close they'd come to failure. We need to get out of here, Thea repeated, her voice urgent. The Syndicate will be swarming this place soon. Where to? Roy asked, wincing as he shifted his weight. The Lucky Strike, Thea replied. It's our only chance of getting off Aldrin 5. They limped through the deserted corridors, the sounds of alarms echoing in their ears. Bruno, having locked down the station, was now guiding them remotely, providing real-time updates on enemy positions and potential escape routes. Master, be advised, Bruno's voice crackled over the communicator. Syndicate security forces are converging on your location. I recommend you proceed with haste. We're moving as fast as we can, Roy grunted, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Perhaps I could provide a distraction. Bruno suggested. I could, for instance, initiate a full-scale system reboot, causing widespread chaos and confusion. Do it, Thea said without hesitation. Every second counts. Moments later, the station lights flickered and died, plunging the corridors into darkness. The alarms intensified, replaced by a cacophony of panicked voices. What the hell is going on? A voice shouted nearby. System reboot initiated, another voice yelled. We're losing control of everything. Taking advantage of the confusion, Roy and Thea reached the service entrance where they had entered the building. The door was still unlocked, thanks to Bruno's intervention. They slipped outside, emerging into the night air. The Lucky Strike was docked a short distance away, its silhouette barely visible in the darkness. Almost there, Thea said, her voice encouraging. But as they approached the ship, they were ambushed by a squad of Syndicate guards. The guards opened fire, laser blasts searing the air around them. "Take cover!" Roy shouted, diving behind a nearby cargo container. Thea returned fire, her shots accurate and deadly. Several guards fell to the ground, clutching their wounds. "We can't stay here," Thea said, her voice tight with urgency. "We're outnumbered." "I have a plan," Roy said, his eyes gleaming with determination. "Bruno, can you remotely activate the Lucky Strike's defensive systems?" "Affirmative, Master," Bruno replied. "Engaging countermeasures now." Suddenly, the Lucky Strike's laser cannons sprang to life, unleashing a barrage of fire on the Syndicate guards. The guards scattered, seeking cover from the onslaught. Taking advantage of the distraction, Roy and Thea sprinted towards the ship, dodging laser blasts and explosions. They reached the boarding ramp and scrambled inside, slamming the door shut behind them. "Computer, get us out of here!" Roy shouted, collapsing into the pilot's seat. The Lucky Strike's engines roared to life, and the ship detached from the station, accelerating into the darkness. Behind them, the Syndicate guards continued to fire, but their shots were no match for the ship's shields. As they cleared Aldrin V's orbit, Roy slumped back in his chair, exhausted but relieved. They had escaped, but they knew the Syndicate would not give up so easily. "Where to now?" Thea asked, her voice filled with concern. "Somewhere safe," Roy said, his eyes fixed on the star map. "Somewhere the Syndicate can't find us." He plotted a course for a remote sector of the galaxy, a region known for its treacherous hyperspace routes and abandoned space stations. It was a dangerous destination, but it was their only hope of evading the Syndicate's pursuit. "Prepare for hyperspace jump," Roy announced, engaging the ship's drive. The Lucky Strike leaped into hyperspace, leaving Aldrin 5 and the Nova Syndicate far behind. As they hurtled through the swirling vortex of hyperspace, Roy took the opportunity to tend to his wound. Thea assisted him, her touch gentle and caring. "Thank you," Roy said, his eyes meeting hers. "You saved my life back there." "You would have done the same for me," Thea replied, her voice soft. "Maybe," Roy said, his lips curving into a faint smile. "But I still owe you one." "Don't worry about it," Thea said. "We're in this together. And we're going to stop the Syndicate, no matter what it takes." As the hours passed, Roy and Thea discussed their next move. They knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. They needed to find a way to expose the Syndicate's conspiracy to the authorities. "We need to get this data core to someone who can help us," Roy said, his brow furrowing. "Someone who can verify its authenticity and bring the Syndicate to justice." "I know someone," Thea said, her eyes gleaming with determination. "A member of the Sector Council. Someone I trust implicitly." "Who?" Roy asked, curious. "Council Elder Lyra," Thea replied. "She's a wise and influential leader. And she's not afraid to stand up to the Syndicate." "Where can we find her?" Roy asked. "She has a hidden research facility on a remote moon in the Corvus system," Thea said. "It's a long shot, but it's our best chance." Roy plotted a new course for the Corvus system, his mind filled with hope. Council Elder Lyra was their only hope of stopping the Syndicate and saving the sector from destruction. But as they approached the Corvus system, they received a disturbing message from Bruno. "Master, be advised," Bruno's voice crackled over the communicator. "I am detecting multiple Syndicate vessels in your vicinity. They are closing in fast." Roy's heart sank. The Syndicate had found them. They were trapped. "Prepare for battle," Roy said, his voice grim. "It looks like we're going to have to fight our way out of this." The Lucky Strike emerged from hyperspace, finding itself surrounded by a fleet of Syndicate warships. The warships opened fire, laser blasts streaking through the void. "Evasive maneuvers," Roy shouted, piloting the ship through a hail of laser fire. Thea manned the ship's gun turrets, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Bruno provided tactical support, guiding their movements and identifying enemy weaknesses. Despite their best efforts, the Lucky Strike was outgunned and outmaneuvered. The ship's shields began to fail, and the hull sustained heavy damage. "We can't hold out much longer," Thea said, her voice filled with despair. "I have an idea," Roy said, his eyes gleaming with desperation. "There's an abandoned space station in this system. A relic from the old war. If we can reach it, we might be able to use it to our advantage." "Are you crazy?" Thea exclaimed. "That station is a death trap. It's infested with pirates and scavengers." "It's our only chance," Roy said. "Trust me." He plotted a course for the abandoned space station, his hands flying over the controls. The Lucky Strike limped towards the station, pursued by the Syndicate fleet. As they approached the station, they saw that it was a massive, derelict structure, its hull riddled with holes and its lights long extinguished. It was a grim and desolate sight. "Here goes nothing," Roy muttered, guiding the ship into the station's docking bay. The Lucky Strike docked with the station, and Roy and Thea scrambled out, weapons drawn. They found themselves in a dark, decaying corridor, the air thick with the smell of rust and decay. "Stay close," Roy said, his voice low. "This place is crawling with danger." They made their way through the station, encountering packs of feral droids and scavenging pirates. They fought their way through, their skills honed by years of experience. Finally, they reached the station's central control room, a large, circular chamber filled with broken consoles and flickering lights. "This is it," Roy said. "If we can get this system online, we might be able to use the station's defenses to fend off the Syndicate fleet." He began working on the controls, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Thea stood guard, her weapon trained on the entrance. "Almost there," Roy muttered, his brow furrowing. "Just a few more tweaks." Suddenly, the door to the control room burst open, and Admiral Volkov, the ruthless commander of the Syndicate fleet, strode into the room, flanked by a squad of heavily armed guards. Well, Volkov said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What do we have here?" "Roy Becker, and his little friend. I must say, I'm impressed. You've managed to elude us for quite some time." "It's not over yet, Volkov," Roy said, his voice defiant. "Oh, but it is," Volkov said, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You're trapped, Becker. There's nowhere left to run." He gestured to his guards, who raised their weapons, ready to fire. "Kill them," Volkov ordered, his voice cold and merciless. "Kill them both." Roy knew they were outgunned and outmaneuvered. Their luck had finally run out. But he wasn't about to give up without a fight. "Thea," Roy said, his eyes meeting hers. "It's been an honor." Thea smiled, her eyes filled with determination. "The honor was all mine, Becker." They stood back to back, weapons drawn, ready to face their fate. But just as Volkov gave the order to fire, the station's lights flickered and died, plunging the control room into darkness. Alarms blared, and the sounds of chaos erupted from throughout the station. "What's happening?" Volkov roared, his voice filled with panic. "I believe Master Bruno has just activated the station's defenses," a guard stammered, his voice trembling. "He's targeting our ships." "Impossible!" Volkov exclaimed, his face contorted with rage. "Not impossible," a familiar voice said, a voice that sent a chill down Volkov's spine. "Just, highly improbable." A figure emerged from the shadows, a figure clad in silver coveralls, her skin shimmering with an ethereal blue glow. It was Thea, but she was different. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and her expression was one of cold, calculating fury. "Who are you?" Volkov demanded, his voice trembling. Thea smiled, a cruel, chilling smile that revealed her true nature. "I am Thea Asri," she said, her voice dripping with venom. And I have come to collect what is owed. Before Volkov could react, Thea raised her hand, and a bolt of energy shot forth, striking Volkov in the chest. The admiral crumpled to the ground, his body convulsing in agony. The guards, terrified by what they had just witnessed, dropped their weapons and fled, their faces pale with fear. Thea turned to Roy, her eyes softening. "Are you ready to finish this, Becker?" she asked, her voice filled with determination. Roy nodded, his eyes gleaming with hope. "Let's do it," he said. "Let's end this once and for all."